Chapter 1. The Invitation to Yuletide Manor. The last post before Christmas always carried a certain excitement, even for a man who claimed to have no heart for sentiment. Hercule Poirot, immaculate in a charcoal overcoat and gleaming patent shoes, stood in the doorway of his Whitehaven mansion's flat and watched the concierge climb the stairs with a silver tray balanced on one gloved hand. On the tray lay a single envelope, thick, cream-coloured, and sealed with crimson wax. The impression in the wax was a stylized flame curling around the letter H. "Delivered by hand, Monsieur Poirot?" said the concierge, eyes bright with curiosity. The gentleman would not leave his name, only that you would understand. Poirot's moustaches gave their characteristic quiver of interest. He took the envelope between gloved thumb and forefinger as though it might scorch him. The paper was heavy, expensive, and faintly scented with pine and something older, myrrh perhaps. Inside was a card, handwritten in a firm, impatient copperplate. Yuletide Manor, Shropshire, 6th of December, 1935. My dear Monsieur Poirot, you will have heard, no doubt, that I am considered eccentric. Some say mad. I prefer the word curious. This Christmas I intend to light the eternal candle of my ancestors, an object that has not seen flame for 75 years. Family legend insists that when it burns again, a truth long buried will rise with the smoke. I should like the finest mind in Europe to be present when that truth reveals itself, whether it prove blessing or curse. Come if the little grey cells are not too weary of English fog and English hypocrisy. The house will be full of Harringtons, and Harringtons, as you may discover, are never dull. A car will collect you from Whitehaven Mansions at 10 o'clock on the 23rd. Bring warmth. Shropshire is cruel in December. Yours in anticipation, Sir Gervas Harrington. But Poirot turned the card over twice, then held it to the light. The watermark was a candle within a circle of holly. He permitted himself the smallest of smiles. "Mon ami," he murmured to the empty air, "you intrigue me." Captain Hastings, arriving at that moment with 2 cups of chocolate and a copy of the Times folded to the racing page, found his friend already at the desk, pen in hand. "I say, Poirot, you look like a cat who has spotted a particularly plump goldfish. What is it?" "An invitation, Hastings. One does not refuse a man who speaks of buried truths and candles that refuse to die. Besides," Poirot tapped the card with satisfaction, "the English aristocracy at Christmas, there is always drama, and where there is drama, there is almost certainly crime." "Crime at Christmas?" Hastings laughed. "Really, old boy, you do see murder in every mince pie." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "We shall see, Hastings, we shall see." 2 days later, at precisely 10 o'clock, a gleaming Bentley, the colour of holly berries, purred to a jog. "Halt outside the building." The chauffeur, a tall man with the stillness of ex-military, touched his cap. "Sir Gervas sends his compliments, sir. He said to tell you the candle is already waiting." Poirot allowed himself to be handed into the back seat. As the car slid through the slushy streets of London and out toward the west, he gazed at the passing shop windows, ablaze with fairy lights, and felt, despite his protestations, a flicker of something perilously close to holiday spirit. The journey took nearly 5 hours. London dissolved into frost-rimed fields, then into the folded hills of Shropshire. Darkness came early, and with it snow, thick, deliberate flakes that softened the world into monochrome. At last the Bentley turned between stone pillars topped with weathered wyverns and began the long climb up a drive flanked by skeletal oaks. Yuletide Manor rose ahead of them like a great ship of mellowed sandstone, its hundreds of windows glowing amber against the night. Every sill bore an electric candle. Real candles, Poirot noted approvingly, would have been a fire risk with such old beams. A towering Christmas tree stood in the courtyard, draped in silver and crimson, its star brushing the belly of the sky. The front doors, oak bound with iron, swung open as the car stopped. Warm light and the scent of pine and cinnamon spilled out. A butler of immense dignity, white-haired and hawk-nosed, bowed. "Monsieur Poirot, Sir Gervas is expecting you. Allow me to take your coat." Poirot surrendered the garment, smoothed his moustache in a nearby mirror, and permitted himself one quiet appraisal of the entrance hall. It was magnificent. A double staircase curved upward like embracing arms. Tapestries of hunting scenes glowed on the walls, and above the vast fireplace hung a portrait of a stern Elizabethan Harrington clutching, of all things, an elaborately carved candle the length of a man's forearm. Before Poirot could study the portrait further, a voice boomed from the minstrel's gallery. "Poirot! By heaven you came!" Sir Gervas Harrington strode down the staircase as though he owned time itself. He was tall, lean, perhaps 65, with a mane of silver hair and eyes the cold blue of glacier ice. He wore a dinner jacket of plum velvet and a crimson cummerbund, every inch the country squire gone gloriously to seed. "You are kind to indulge an old man's whim," he said, seizing Poirot's hand in a grip that could crack walnuts. "Come, you must be frozen. Mulled wine by the fire. Then I'll present you to the rest of this menagerie." He led Poirot across the hall, boots ringing on the flagstones. "I've gathered the whole wretched clan," he continued cheerfully. "My sister Lavinia, who believes in ghosts. My nephew Julian, who believes in nothing except fast women and slow horses. My niece Diana, who is far too beautiful for her own good. And young Mr. Redfern, the solicitor, who is here to witness the lighting of the candle and, no doubt, to make sure none of us murder each other before probate." Poirot's eyebrows ascended. "You anticipate murder, Sir Gervas?" The baronet laughed, a sound like logs splitting in a fire. "Only as a remote possibility, but the candle has not burned since 1860, when my great-grandfather lit it and promptly dropped dead. Family superstition says the flame reveals who deserves the Harrington fortune and who deserves something less pleasant." I thought it time to put the story to the test. They had reached the great fireplace. Above the mantel, the Elizabethan portrait seemed to watch them with disapproval. Sir Gervas followed Poirot's gaze. "That's old Sir Hugh, painted in 1588. The candle he holds is the very one we shall light on Christmas Eve. Solid beeswax, laced with who knows what spices and prayers. They say it will burn for 12 nights and reveal a secret on the 12th. Romantic twaddle, of course, but amusing." Poirot studied the painted candle. Even in oils it looked strange, thicker than any candle he had ever seen, carved with symbols that hurt the eye if stared at too long. "And you, mon ami," he said softly, "you believe there is truth in this legend?" Sir Gervas's smile faded a fraction. "I believe," he said, "that secrets kept too long grow poisonous. Light kills poison. We shall see." A gong sounded, deep and sonorous, somewhere in the depths of the house. "Dinner," announced Sir Gervas, suddenly brisk again. "Afterward, I'll show you the candle itself. It's kept in the long gallery, under lock and key. Tomorrow the rest of the guests arrive. And then the real fun begins." He clapped Poirot on the shoulder and steered him towards the dining room. As they walked beneath the stern gaze of generations of Harringtons, Poirot felt the familiar prickle at the base of his skull that told him the little grey cells would not be idle this Christmas. Outside, the snow continued to fall, thick and silent, wrapping Yuletide Manor in a blanket of white. Inside, fires roared, wine glowed ruby and crystal, and an ancient candle waited in the dark for the match that would set a 75-year silence ablaze. Chapter 2. Arrival amid the snowflakes. The morning of the 23rd of December broke iron grey and wind-lashed. Hercule Poirot stood at the window of his guest bedchamber on the second floor and watched the snow hurl itself against the leaded panes like a living thing trying to get in. Yuletide Manor looked older in daylight, a great crouching beast of sandstone and chimneys, half smothered under its white pelt. Somewhere below, a peacock screamed. The sound was thin, metallic, and utterly miserable. Poirot turned from the window with a small shudder. He disliked the English countryside at the best of times. In a blizzard, it became positively hostile. Still, he dressed with his usual precision. Dove-grey spats, a waistcoat of palest lilac, and the heavy, charcoal overcoat that made him resemble a very elegant seal. The moustache received its ritual smoothing. One must be armoured, even against snow. He descended the west staircase at precisely 9 o'clock, drawn by the smell of coffee and the low murmur of voices. The entrance hall had been transformed overnight. Garlands of holly and ivy twined up the banisters, studded with fat scarlet berries that looked like drops of fresh blood against the dark leaves. A second Christmas tree, this one smaller, more intimate, stood beside the main doors, hung entirely with tiny silver bells that chimed whenever a draught found its way in. Sir Gervais was already there, barking orders at 2 footmen who were attempting to manoeuvre an enormous Yule log toward the hearth. He wore a tweed suit the colour of wet moss, and looked as though he had been awake since dawn. "Poirot! Splendid! Come and meet the advance guard. Some arrived last night after you had retired." He gestured toward the breakfast room. Through the open double doors, Poirot glimpsed a long table, gleaming with silver and porcelain, and seated around it, a collection of faces that might have stepped straight from one of his own cases. First to rise was a tall woman of perhaps 60, dressed in violet silk and a quantity of jet beads that clashed softly when she moved. Her hair was an improbable shade of copper, and her eyes were the faded blue of old porcelain. "My sister, Miss Lavinia Harrington," said Sir Gervais with a theatrical sigh. "Lavinia, this is the famous Hercule Poirot." Miss Harrington extended a gloved hand as though expecting it to be kissed. Poirot obliged with a bow that managed to be both courtly and non-committal. "I have read of your exploits, monsieur," she said in a voice like dry leaves. "I do hope you have brought your little grey cells. This house is full of ghosts, and some of them are still breathing." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "One deals with the living first, mademoiselle. The dead are usually more polite." Sir Gervais snorted with laughter and steered Poirot onward. Next was a young man lounging against the sideboard, lighting a cigarette with unnecessary flourish. He was handsome in the careless English way, fair hair falling over one eye, mouth curved in permanent amusement. His tailcoat was midnight blue velvet, and a white carnation drooped in his buttonhole. "My nephew, Julian Harrington," said Sir Gervais without warmth. "Julian, try not to bankrupt the estate before luncheon." Julian raised an eyebrow. "Morning, uncle. Morning, Mr. Poirot. Don't mind the governor. He thinks poverty is catching." He inhaled luxuriously. "Actually, I'm rather counting on the eternal candle to settle my debts. Legend says it points to the true heir, doesn't it? I could use a spot of pointing." Sir Gervais's jaw tightened, but before he could reply, a clear voice cut across the room. "Julian, do stop being provocative before. Coffee. It's vulgar." The speaker was a girl, no, a young woman, of such vivid beauty that Poirot felt the temperature of the room rise several degrees. She had hair the colour of new chestnuts, and eyes the green of holly leaves. She wore a simple dress of claret wool that should have been severe but somehow looked like a dare. "My niece, Diana Harrington," said Sir Gervais. Pride and exasperation mingled. "Diana, Monsieur Poirot." She offered a hand gloved in soft doeskin. "How do you do? Uncle Gervais has been boasting about you for weeks. I warned him famous detectives dislike being treated as parlour entertainment, but he never listens." Poirot bowed over her hand. "On the contrary, mademoiselle, I am always entertained by beauty and by danger." Diana laughed, a low, delighted sound. "Then you will be thoroughly amused at this Christmas." A discreet cough reminded them that they were not alone. A thin, bespectacled man in his 40s had risen from the far end of the table. His suit was impeccably sober, his expression one of permanent anxiety. "Charles Redfern," he introduced himself, shaking Poirot's hand with the limp grip of a man who spent his life among documents. "Sir Gervais's solicitor. I'm here to witness the lighting of the candle and make sure everything is legal and above board." "Meaning?" Julian drawled. "To ensure none of us slip poison into Uncle's brandy before the wick is lit." Redfern flushed crimson. Miss Harrington gave a small, shocked gasp that somehow sounded rehearsed. Sir Gervais clapped his hands like a schoolmaster. "Enough! We are not savages, yet. Come, Poirot, fortify yourself with bacon and eggs. The rest of the party arrives this afternoon, and then the real circus begins." Poirot allowed himself to be seated between Diana and Miss Harrington. The breakfast was magnificent. Devilled kidneys, kedgeree, kippers, hot rolls, and marmalade the colour of burnished copper. He ate sparingly, observing. Julian smoked and drank coffee black, ignoring food. Diana buttered toast with quick, decisive movements, and watched her cousin with cool amusement. Miss Harrington nibbled at a slice of dry toast, and darted glances toward the windows as though expecting spectral visitors. Redfern ate nothing at all. He kept consulting a pocket watch and making tiny notes in a leather-bound book. Conversation was sporadic. Outside, the snow had eased into a steady, deliberate fall. The world beyond the mullioned windows was nothing but white and grey. At 11:30, the doorbell gave a sepulchral clang that echoed through the house like a funeral knell. The butler appeared, snowflakes melting on his shoulders. "Miss Verity Blaine and Dr. Meredith have arrived, Sir Gervais." Sir Gervais rubbed his hands. "Excellent! The last piece is on the board." He strode into the hall, the others trailing behind like courtiers. Poirot followed more slowly, noting how Diana's shoulders stiffened at the names. The newcomers stood just inside the doors, shaking snow from their coats. The woman was small and dark, wrapped in sables, with a face sharp and clever as a fox. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, perhaps 35, with the sort of rugged good looks that belonged on a cricket pitch. His eyes, however, were tired. "Verity, my dear," Sir Gervais boomed, kissing the woman on both cheeks. "And Meredith, good to see you, my boy. Come in, you look half frozen." Verity Blaine's gaze swept the assembled company and settled on Poirot with frank curiosity. "So you're the detective," she said without preamble. "Gervais has been unbearable about you. I'm Verity Blaine, distant cousin, poor relation, and general troublemaker." Dr. Meredith merely nodded, murmuring, "Pleased to meet you," in a voice that suggested the pleasure was limited. Diana stepped forward, her smile bright and brittle. "Hello, Stephen," she said to the doctor. "It's been a long time." "Deanna?" His tone was careful, almost wary. An almost imperceptible tremor passed through the group, like the hush before thunder. Poirot's moustache twitched. Ah, there it was, the first unmistakable scent of drama. Old love, perhaps, or old hate. Sometimes they smelled remarkably similar. Sir Gervas, mercifully oblivious, herded everyone toward the drawing-room fire. "Plenty of time for catching up," he declared. "Tonight we decorate the great tree in the long gallery, and tomorrow, Christmas Eve, we light the candle. After that—" He spread his hands theatrically. "Who knows? Fortunes may rise or fall. Secrets may burn." He laughed, but no one joined him. Outside, the snow began again in earnest, sealing Yuletide Manor away from the world. 12 people now sat beneath its ancient roof, bound together by blood, greed, history, and something older still. Poirot sipped his coffee and listened to the wind rattling the casements. Somewhere in the house, a clock struck 12 slow notes. The game, he thought with a small, satisfied smile, has begun. Chapter 3. The Legend of the Eternal Candle. The long gallery ran the entire length of the east wing, a cavernous room lined with ancestral portraits, whose eyes followed every footstep. Tonight it had been transformed into a Christmas bower. 3 crystal chandeliers blazed overhead, their light splintering into 1,000 shards across garlands of ivy and crimson ribbon. At the far end stood the great tree, a 15-foot Norway spruce dragged in that afternoon by 6 swearing footmen, still bare, waiting for the ceremonial dressing. But no one was looking at the tree yet. They were gathered in a loose semicircle before a walnut cabinet the size of a small altar. Its doors stood open, revealing a crimson velvet cushion. On the cushion rested the eternal candle. Even Poirot, who prided himself on immunity to theatrical effects, felt the room still. The candle was monstrous, nearly 3 feet long and as thick as a man's thigh, carved from beeswax the colour of old ivory. Strange symbols, neither Latin nor Greek, yet somehow familiar, spiralled up its length, picked out in gold leaf, that caught the chandelier light and flung it back like sparks. At the top, the wick was blackened, as though someone had once tried to light it and thought better. A faint scent, frankincense, cloves, and something metallic, rose from it, heavy and ancient. Sir Gervas stood beside the cabinet like a high priest about to begin a rite. "Close the doors, Grimshaw," he ordered the butler. "We don't want draughts." The heavy oak doors thudded shut. The wind outside gave a sudden howl, as though offended at being excluded. Sir Gervas turned to his audience. The fire in the marble hearth roared. Shadows leapt across the painted faces of dead Harringtons. "Most of you have heard scraps of the story," he began, voice pitched low so that everyone leaned forward unconsciously. "But tonight, before we decorate the tree, you shall hear it whole. Then there will be no pretending ignorance when the thing is lit tomorrow night." He rested one hand possessively on the cabinet. In 1588, Queen Elizabeth granted this land to Sir Hugh Harrington, my direct ancestor, for services rendered against the Spanish Armada. Sir Hugh was a strange man, alchemist, astrologer, and some said sorcerer. When he knew death was near, he summoned a Moorish craftsman from Seville who was reputed to work miracles in wax. Together they made this candle. Into it they poured rare gums, powdered gems, and, according to family legend, a single drop of Sir Hugh's own blood. Miss Lavinia gave a small theatrical gasp. Julian rolled his eyes, but even he had stopped smoking. On Christmas Eve, 1588, Sir Gervase continued, Sir Hugh lit the candle in this very gallery. It burned with a blue flame that never consumed the wax. For 12 nights it burned, and on the 12th night Sir Hugh gathered his 3 sons and spoke these words. I quote from his journal, "The flame shall choose the true heir, and to the others it shall show what they most fear to see." Then he blew it out. The candle has never been relit since, not in 347 years. Dr. Meredith shifted his weight. With respect, Sir Gervase, journals can be embellished, and wax does not behave that way. Sir Gervase smiled thinly. You are a man of science, Stephen. Good. Science will make what follows all of the more interesting. He reached into his pocket and produced a small leather-bound book, its cover cracked and dark with age. This is the journal. I have read it many times. After Sir Hugh's death, his eldest son inherited everything, land, title, fortune. The second son vanished the same night and was never found. The third son was discovered at dawn on Christmas morning, hanging from that very beam. He pointed upward to a massive oak, crossbeam directly above the cabinet. No rope was ever discovered. He simply hung there. A log cracked in the grate. Verity Blaine gave a soft, incredulous laugh that died quickly. In 1760, Sir Gervase went on relentlessly, another Harrington, my great-great-grandfather, decided to test the legend. He lit the candle on Christmas Eve. Again it burned blue and did not diminish. On the 12th night, he gathered the family, read the same words from the journal, and blew it out. Within a month, he was dead, poisoned by his own wife, who then drank the same poison herself. Their only son inherited, but the estate has been in debt ever since. Diana's voice was barely above a whisper. And in 1860? Sir Gervase's eyes glittered. 1860 was the last time. My grandfather, a rational man, educated at Cambridge, laughed at the story. He lit the candle to prove it nonsense. It burned for 11 nights. On the 12th, he gathered the family here, read the words, and collapsed dead before he could extinguish the flame. Heart failure, the doctor said, but his face— Sir Gervase paused, savouring the silence. His face was twisted as though he had seen the devil himself. The fire popped again. Snow hissed against the tall windows. Julian broke the spell with a nervous laugh. Splendid ghost story, Uncle. You should take it on the music halls. But really, blue flames, disappearing brothers, suicidal wives, it's all rather gothic, isn't it? Gothic? Sir Gervase repeated softly. Perhaps. Yet the candle remains unconsumed. Look at it, Julian. Look closely. Julian stepped forward with exaggerated nonchalance, but Poirot noticed the slight tremor in the hand that held the cigarette. The others followed, drawn despite themselves. Up close, the candle was even stranger. The carved symbols seemed to shift when viewed from the corner of the eye. Poirot leaned in, nostrils flaring at the scent. Frankincense, yes, and something coppery beneath. He recognized one symbol repeated 3 times, a circle bisected by a flame, the mark of the alchemist's crucible. Charles Redfern cleared his throat. As the family solicitor, I must point out that Sir Gervase has made a new will, to be read on 12th night, assuming the candle is allowed to burn its course. The terms are unusual. Unusual. Sir Gervase laughed outright. They are revolutionary. The candle will decide who inherits Yuletide Manor and the remaining Harrington fortune. Not primogeniture, not sentiment. The flame will choose. I have instructed Redfern to insert a clause. Whoever the flame indicates shall receive everything. The rest get nothing. Miss Lavinia swayed and clutched Verity's arm. Gervase, this is madness. You cannot gamble an entire estate on a parlour trick. It is no trick, he replied quietly. Tomorrow night, Christmas Eve, I will light the candle at midnight. It will burn until 12th night. On the 12th evening we will gather here again. I will read Sir Hugh's words. Then we shall see whom the flame favours, and what the others are forced to see. Dr. Meredith's voice cut through like a scalpel. And if someone simply snuffs it out before then? Sir Gervase smiled, and for the first time there was something almost cruel in it. Then the entire estate passes to the Shropshire Cats Protection League. I have made certain of that. A stunned silence greeted this announcement. Diana was the first to recover. "You're serious," she said wonderingly. "You would really disinherit your own flesh and blood on the strength of a 400-year-old fairy tale?" "I am tired," Sir Gervase said simply, "of Harringtons lying, cheating, and hating one another for money. Let the candle judge. It judged before. It can judge again." He closed the cabinet doors with a soft final click. The key, old iron, heavy as gilt, he hung around his own neck on a black ribbon. "Now," he said, suddenly brisk, "let us decorate the tree and pretend, for one evening, that we are a normal family celebrating a normal Christmas." But no one moved immediately. The candle, hidden once more behind walnut and velvet, seemed to exert a pull stronger than gravity. Poirot felt it, a pressure behind the eyes, a whisper at the edge of hearing. He looked around the circle of faces and catalogued them with clinical precision. Sir Gervase, triumphant, almost feverish. Miss Lavinia, terrified and furious. Julian, calculating, already wondering how one might cheat a candle. Diana, pale, but with a spark of something reckless in her eyes. Verity Blaine, amused yet watching Diana with sharp speculation. Dr. Meredith, unreadable, jaw clenched. Charles Redfern, sweating slightly despite the cold. And behind them all, the portraits of dead Harringtons stared down in painted silence, waiting to see which of their descendants would join them soonest. Poirot smoothed his moustache and permitted himself one quiet sentence, spoken only to the little grey cells. "Tomorrow night, mes amis, the past begins to burn." Outside, the wind rose to a shriek, driving snow against the windows like fists trying to break in. Chapter 4. Shadows in the Candlelight. The house settled into an uneasy hush after the long gallery scene, as though the very walls were holding their breath. Dinner was announced at 8, but the meal passed in brittle small talk and the excessive clinking of crystal. No one spoke of the candle directly. Instead, they spoke around it, the way one circles a loaded revolver lying in the centre of the table. Poirot ate little. He watched. Julian drank too much claret and laughed too loudly at his own jokes. Diana's eyes kept drifting toward Dr. Meredith, who stared fixedly at his plate. Miss Lavinia clutched a small crystal vial of smelling salts, as though it were a crucifix. Verity Blaine alone seemed amused by the tension, her dark eyes glittering each time Sir Gervase refilled her glass. At 10 o'clock the ladies withdrew, an old-fashioned ritual Sir Gervase insisted upon, and the men lingered over port and cigars. Poirot excused himself early, pleading the journey. In truth, he wished to prowl. He moved through the corridors like a small, neat shadow. Yuletide Manor at night was a different creature. Portraits became watchful sentinels. Suits of armour loomed like silent witnesses. Every candle flame trembled in the draughts that found their way through ancient stone. He paused outside the library door. Voices, low, urgent, leaked through the gap. "You cannot seriously intend to let that thing decide our futures," Julian was saying, words slightly slurred. Sir Gervase's reply was steel. "I have never been more serious in my life." "Then you are mad." "Possibly, but I am master here, and my madness will be law." A silence, then the soft clink of decanter against glass. Poirot glided on. He found himself at the foot of the west staircase. Above him, a single electric candle in a red glass shade cast a bloody glow across the landing. Someone was moving up there. Light footsteps, quick and furtive. A woman's silhouette paused, glanced down, then vanished toward the guest wing. Diana, Verity, it was impossible to be certain. Poirot continued his circuit. He passed the long gallery doors, locked as expected, then the billiard room, where Dr. Meredith stood alone at the table, mechanically potting ball after ball without seeming to see them. The doctor's face was drawn, sweat gleamed at his temples despite the chill. "Vous jouez seul, docteur?" Poirot inquired softly. Meredith started, the cue jerking in his hand. "Poirot! Didn't see you there." He attempted a smile that failed. "Can't sleep. Thought I'd tire myself out." "Or perhaps," Poirot said gently, "you fear what dreams may come when the candle is lit." Meredith's knuckles whitened on the cue. "Superstition," he muttered, "all of it. Yet you believe enough to lose sleep." The doctor said nothing. After a moment, he laid the cue across the table and walked out without another word. Poirot lingered, running a finger along the green baize. A single red ball remained, trembling on the edge of a pocket as though undecided whether to fall. At 11:30, he returned to the main hall. Most of the house lights had been dimmed for the night. Only the great chandelier still burned, reduced to a single bulb that swung gently in the updraft from the fire. The Christmas tree in the courtyard glimmered through the tall windows, its coloured lights smeared by drifting snow. Poirot was about to mount the stairs when a flicker of movement caught his eye. A candle, an ordinary household candle, had been placed on the bottom step of the east staircase. It was lit. The flame was perfectly steady, unnaturally so. Beside it lay a single sprig of holly, berries glistening like tiny drops of blood. Poirot's eyebrows ascended. Someone, clearly, wished to lure him. He glanced around. The hall was empty, the fire settling into dull coals. Somewhere far off, a clock chimed the 3/4 hour. He approached the candle. The holly had been freshly cut. A bead of sap still clung to the severed stem. Beneath the sprig lay a folded scrap of paper. Poirot unfolded it with gloved fingers. Written in hasty capitals, "The candle lies. Ask the doctor why he fears blue fire." No signature. Poirot turned the paper over, sniffed it. Cheap notepaper, violet ink, then tucked it into his waistcoat pocket. He picked up the candle and began to climb the east staircase, moving without sound. The upper corridor was in darkness except for thin blades of moonlight that slipped between the shutters. He passed the long gallery, still locked, then the closed doors of the family bedrooms. At the far end, a baize door led to the old nursery wing, long disused. The candle flame suddenly guttered, though there was no draught. Poirot paused. Ahead of him, something white flickered at floor level and vanished around the corner. He followed. The nursery corridor smelled of dust and cedar. Moonlight fell through a single round window, illuminating a row of child-sized chairs and a rocking horse whose painted eye gleamed with lunatic cheer. The candle in Poirot's hand now burned with a distinctly bluish tinge. He stopped. At the end of the passage stood a full-length mirror in a tarnished gilt frame. In it, Poirot saw himself, small, immaculate, holding the candle. Behind his reflection, another figure stood, tall, indistinct, arms hanging loosely at its sides. Poirot did not turn. He kept his eyes on the mirror. "Bonsoir," he said conversationally. "You have gone to much trouble to arrange this little charade." The figure in the glass remained motionless. Poirot took one step backward. The reflection did not move with him. He felt the hairs rise on the nape of his neck, not fear precisely, but recognition. This was no ordinary trick of light. Very deliberately, he raised the candle higher. The blue flame lengthened, stretched, became almost white. In the mirror, the tall figure lifted its head. For an instant, Poirot saw a face. Pale, anguished, unmistakably the face of a Harrington long dead. Then the candle flared violently, and the glass showed only himself again. The flame returned to normal gold. The corridor was empty. Poirot exhaled, a small controlled sound. He pinched out the wick between thumb and forefinger. The pain was sharp and grounding. When he turned to retrace his steps, the holly sprig lay on the floor behind him, though he had carried nothing but the candle. He picked it up. The berries had been crushed. Dark juice stained his glove like blood. Downstairs, the grandfather clock in the hall began to strike midnight. Poirot descended slowly. At the bottom, he found Dr. Meredith waiting, fully dressed, face ashen. "You saw it," the doctor said. "It was not a question." "I saw something," Poirot admitted. Meredith's voice dropped to a whisper. "Then God help us all when the real candle is lit." He pushed past Poirot and disappeared into the darkness of the west wing. Poirot stood alone beneath the dying chandelier. He looked at the crushed holly in his hand, then at the staircase where the anonymous candle had first appeared. Somewhere in the house, a door closed with the soft finality of a coffin lid. He tucked the holly into his pocket beside the note and addressed the empty air with quiet satisfaction. "Très bien. The shadows begin to move. Tomorrow night, when the eternal candle burns, the little grey cells will be ready." Above him, the single bulb in the chandelier gave one last flicker and went out, plunging the hall into darkness, relieved only by the cold glow of snow through the windows. In that darkness, unseen, a faint scent of frankincense and myrrh lingered for a long time. Chapter 5. The Midnight Disappearance. Christmas Eve arrived in a hush of white fury. The snow that had threatened for days now fell in earnest, thick, deliberate flakes that blotted out the hills and turned the world into a single blurred page. By noon the drive was impassable. By 3 o'clock the telephone wires were down. Yuletide Manor was sealed as tightly as a tomb. Sir Gervase greeted the isolation with savage satisfaction. "Good," he declared over luncheon, rubbing his hands. "No one enters, no one leaves. The candle shall have its 12 nights undisturbed." No one argued. The mood in the dining room was brittle as the icicles hanging from the eaves. Poirot observed everything. Julian had developed a nervous tic at the corner of his left eye. Diana's laughter came too quickly and ended too abruptly. Dr. Meredith had not slept. The skin beneath his eyes was the colour of wet ash. Only Verity Blaine seemed unaffected, humming "God rest ye merry, gentlemen," as she buttered a scone. At 6 o'clock the great bell in the stable tower was rung for the dressing hour. At 7, the house party assembled in the long gallery for the ceremonial lighting. The room had been prepared with medieval solemnity. Heavy velvet curtains shut out the storm. A dozen branched candelabra cast pools of gold across the polished floor. The walnut cabinet stood open. The eternal candle rested on a low ebony table directly beneath the fatal beam. Beside it lay a silver salver containing a single long beeswax taper and a box of vestas. Sir Gervase entered last, wearing full evening dress, and the riband of some obscure order across his shirt front. Around his neck the iron key still hung on its black ribbon. He looked, Poirot thought, like a man walking to his own coronation, or his execution. The guests arranged themselves in a rough semicircle. No one spoke. Even Julian had left his cigarette case downstairs. Sir Gervasus raised the taper, lit it from a candelabrum, and turned to the company. "Midnight is almost upon us," he said. His voice rang against the rafters. "When the candle is lit, it must not be extinguished until 12th night. Anyone who interferes will forfeit all claim to the estate. Have I made myself clear?" A murmur of assent. Miss Lavinia crossed herself. The clock in the corner, an immense Elizabethan piece with a moon-faced dial, began to chime. 1, 2, 3. At the 12th stroke, Sir Gervase lowered the taper to the ancient wick. For a heartbeat nothing happened. Then the wick caught. A tongue of flame, pale, almost colourless, sprang upward. It widened, deepened, and settled into a steady vivid blue that hurt the eyes to watch. There was no smoke, no sputter. The great candle burned with perfect silence, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Miss Lavinia gave a small, choked cry. Julian swore beneath his breath. Dr. Meredith took one involuntary step backward. Sir Gervase's face was transfigured. Triumph, fear, and something close to ecstasy. "It burns," he whispered. "After 347 years, it burns again." He set the taper carefully in a holder and stepped back. For perhaps 10 seconds no one moved. The blue flame rose straight and unwavering, throwing strange shadows that crawled across the faces of the portraits. Then, abruptly, every electric light in the gallery went out. A collective gasp. Darkness swallowed the room except for the unearthly glow of the candle itself. "Stay calm," Sir Gervase barked. "It is only the storm, the generator." His words were cut off by a woman's scream, high, tearing, unmistakably Diana's. Torch beams stabbed the darkness. Someone found the door switch. The chandeliers flickered once, twice, then blazed back to life. The circle had broken. People stood in confused knots. Diana was on her knees beside the ebony table, staring at the floor. The space where Sir Gervase had stood was empty. He was gone. Poirot moved with the speed of a much younger man. In 3 strides he reached Diana, took her gently by the shoulders. "Mademoiselle, compose yourself. Where is your uncle?" She lifted a face bleached of colour. He was right here. I turned to speak to Stephen, and when the lights came back he had vanished, just vanished." Poirot looked at the candle. It still burned serene and blue, its flame not so much as trembling. Julian's voice cracked. "This is a trick! Uncle Gervase is playing the magician to frighten us!" But his bravado rang hollow. The long gallery had only one set of double doors, and Grimshaw the butler stood before them, face grey. "No one has passed me, sir," he said hoarsely. "I swear it." Poirot's gaze swept the room. The tall windows were latched against the storm. The chimney was far too narrow for a man. The oak floor showed no trapdoor, no secret panel disturbed. Yet Sir Gervase Harrington had disappeared as completely as a soap, bubble pricked by a needle. Dr. Meredith found his voice. "We must search the house at once." They searched every room, every cupboard, every attic and cellar. Footmen and maids were roused. Torches flashed along corridors. Doors banged. The storm howled mockery at their efforts. By 2 o'clock they reassembled, shivering, in the entrance hall. Snow had drifted against the front doors. No footprints led away from the house. The telephone remained dead. They were 12 frightened people, marooned in a manor that now felt far too large. Poirot stood beneath the great chandelier, hands clasped behind his back. "Listen to me," he said quietly. and every face turned toward him. Sir Gervas has not left the house. Of that I am certain. He is clever, yes, but not Whodini. Somewhere within these walls he is hidden, willingly or unwillingly. Tomorrow, when daylight comes, we search again, more methodically. Tonight, we post watches. 2 persons to every main door, and 1 person here in the long gallery with the candle. It must not be left alone. He looked at each in turn. And no one is to wander alone. Is that understood? Nods, some reluctant, some eager. Poirot assigned the watches himself. He took the first vigil in the long gallery with Dr. Meredith, whose face was grim and set. When the others had gone, Meredith closed the doors and leaned against them. "He's dead," the doctor said flatly. "I can smell it." Poirot regarded the blue flame. It had grown no shorter. The carvings on the candle seemed almost to pulse in the strange light. "Perhaps," Poirot murmured, "perhaps not. But notice, mon ami, the candle continues to burn exactly as legend decreed. And legend, Dr. Meredith, has a nasty habit of being accurate in the details it chooses to remember." He drew from his pocket the crushed holly sprig and the anonymous note he had received the night before. "Tell me," he said softly, "why does a rational medical man fear blue fire?" Meredith stared at him for a long moment. Then, very deliberately, he reached out and touched the cold iron key that still hung around Sir Gervas's absent neck. No, the ribbon was there, but the key itself was gone. "God help me," Meredith whispered. "I think the candle has already begun to choose." Far away in the house, a clock struck 3. The blue flame burned on, steady and merciless, throwing long shadows that reached like fingers toward the beam overhead where, 3 centuries earlier, a younger Harrington had hanged without a rope. Outside, the storm screamed, and somewhere inside Yuletide Manor something screamed with it. Chapter 6. Clues in the Frosted Garden. Dawn on Christmas morning came late and sullen. A dull pewter light that filtered through the snow-laden clouds and turned the world the colour of old pewter. The storm had spent itself during the night. Now the air was so cold it seemed brittle. Every breath hung in front of the face like a small ghost. Poirot stood at the long gallery window and looked down upon a landscape transformed. The lawns were gone, swallowed by drifts as high as a man's waist. The topiary peacocks wore white hoods. The fountain in the rose garden had frozen mid-spurt, a crystal plume suspended forever. And across this pristine expanse ran a single line of footprints. They began beneath the library's French windows, crossed the terrace, descended the 3 stone steps, and marched straight toward the old ice house at the far end of the walled garden. There they stopped. No returning prints marred the snow. Poirot's moustache bristled with satisfaction. At last, something concrete. He turned from the window. Dr. Meredith had been relieved at 6 by a pale and trembling Charles Redfern, who now sat hunched in an armchair, eyes fixed on the eternal candle, as though it might lunge at him. The blue flame had not diminished by so much as a millimetre. "Monsieur Redfern," Poirot said crisply, "you will summon the household to the breakfast-room in 20 minutes. But first, you and I will fetch coats and boots. There are footprints in the snow that demand immediate attention." Redfern opened his mouth to protest, saw the expression on Poirot's face, and closed it again. 15 minutes later the 2 men stood on the terrace, wrapped like Arctic explorers. Poirot carried a magnifying glass and a short bamboo walking stick he had borrowed from the umbrella stand. The cold struck like a physical blow. Within seconds their eyelashes were rimmed with frost. "Observe," Poirot said, pointing with the stick. "1 set only. The stride is long, hurried, The depth of the impression suggests a tall man wearing heavy outdoor boots. See here." He crouched, breath pluming. The left heel is worn distinctly on the outside edge. Sir Gervase favoured his right leg after that hunting accident 2 years ago, n'est-ce pas? Redfern nodded dumbly. They followed the trail. The snow had a hard crust. Beneath it was softer, so that each footfall made a crisp, crunching sound. Halfway across the lawn, Poirot paused again. "Tiens, what is this?" A dark stain marred the snow, small, irregular, already frozen into crimson ice. Poirot scraped gently with the ferrule of his stick. More stains appeared, a dotted line leading onward. "Blood," Redfern whispered. "Possibly," Poirot said. "Or port wine. We shall see." The footprints reached the walled garden and passed through the wrought-iron gate, which stood ajar. Inside, the scene was unearthly. Box hedges rose like white cliffs. The sundial wore a tall conical hat of snow. The prince continued along the central path, past the frozen herb beds, straight to the ice house. The ice house was a low domed brick structure, half sunk into the earth, its oak door reinforced with iron bands. The footprints ended directly in front of it. The door was closed, but not latched. A thin blade of darkness showed, between door and jamb. Poirot grasped the iron ring and pulled. The door opened with a groan of frost-stiff hinges. A wave of colder air rolled out, carrying the smell of damp stone and something sweeter, cloying, metallic. Inside, the ice house was a circular pit 20 feet across. In summer, it would be filled with blocks of ice from the lake. Now it was empty, save for a thin skin of frost on the brick floor, and, in the centre, a darker shape. Sir Gervase Harrington lay on his back, arms flung wide as though embracing the cold. His evening dress was soaked with melted snow. His silver hair was stiff with rime. A thin line of blood had frozen across his temple like a scarlet thread. Most startling of all, in his right hand, he still clutched the iron key on its black ribbon. The ribbon had been torn, not cut. Poirot stepped carefully down the 3 brick steps. Redfern hung back at the threshold, making small, shocked noises. "Dead?" the solicitor quavered. Poirot knelt, touched the carotid artery, then the wrist. The flesh was rigid, marble cold. "Several hours, I should say. Rigour is complete." He examined the wound at the temple. A single blow, delivered with considerable force. The skin is split, but the skull beneath feels intact. Murder, almost certainly, yet not instantly fatal. He walked here, or was walked here, after receiving the injury. He looked up at the dome above them. A small ventilation shaft pierced the brickwork at the apex. Through it, a shaft of grey light fell directly onto the body. "Notice," Poirot murmured, "how the light strikes the key. Almost theatrical, no?" Redfern found his voice. "But how did the door close behind him? And why come here at all? Excellent questions." Poirot stood, brushing frost from his gloves. "Come, we must fetch the others, and Dr. Meredith must examine the body before we move it. But first," he bent again, this time over the dead man's left hand. Between the frozen fingers protruded a scrap of green leaf and 3 bright berries. "Holly," Poirot said softly. "The same as was left for me 2 nights ago." Redfern stared, comprehension dawning like horror. "You think Sir Gervase left those messages himself?" "Someone did, and that someone knew he would die." They left the ice house, closing the door gently behind them. As they retraced their steps across the garden, Poirot's sharp eyes noted fresh details. A single set of smaller prints, a woman's perhaps, coming from the direction of the orangery, and merging with Sir Gervase's trail for a few yards before veering off toward the potting shed. a broken branch on a yew tree where something or someone had brushed past in haste. And half buried in a drift near the library windows, the glint of metal. Poirot stooped and retrieved a silver cigarette case, Julian's, engraved with his initials in flowing script. One corner was dented and flecked with what might have been dried blood. Poirot slipped it into his pocket without comment. By the time they reached the terrace, the rest of the household had gathered in anxious knots at the breakfast-room windows. Diana's face was the colour of paper. Julian looked suddenly sober. Miss Lavinia was praying aloud in a high, tuneless whine. Dr. Meredith pushed forward, took one look at Poirot's expression, and reached for his medical bag without a word. While Meredith and 2 footmen went to bring the body indoors, Poirot addressed the assembled company in the warmth of the entrance hall. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "Christmas Day has brought us a tragedy. Sir Gervase Harrington is dead, murdered, I regret to say. The local police cannot reach us for several days. The roads are impassable. Therefore, until they arrive, I, Hercule Poirot, will conduct the investigation. You will oblige me by remaining within the house and by answering my questions with complete honesty. Any attempt to leave or to conceal evidence will be viewed with the utmost suspicion." He let that sink in, then added gently, "Also, the eternal candle continues to burn. I have stationed Grimshaw to watch it. No one is to enter the long gallery alone." Julian gave a harsh laugh. "So the candle chose after all, did it? Pointed straight to Uncle Gervase and struck him down." "Perhaps," Poirot said, "or perhaps someone merely wished us to think so." He looked slowly around the circle of pale, frightened faces. "Someone in this house struck Sir Gervase on the head shortly after midnight, walked with him, or dragged him, across the garden, and left him to die of cold and blood loss in the ice-house. That same person closed the door, returned to the house, and rejoined the search as though nothing had occurred." Diana made a small choking sound. Verity put an arm around her shoulders. Poirot's voice softened. "I will discover who that person is, of that you may be certain. But for now let us go in. It is Christmas Day, and even murderers must eat breakfast." He turned toward the dining room, then paused as though a thought had just struck him. "One last thing," he said almost casually. "Did any of you by chance notice a half-burned candle, ordinary household candle, lying on the library hearth this morning?" No one spoke. Poirot smiled a small, wintry smile. "No? How curious. Because I found one there myself, and the wax, mes amis, is the exact shade of blue, as the flame now burning in the long gallery." He bowed slightly and led the way to breakfast, leaving behind him a silence more chilling than the snow outside. Chapter 7. The Poisoned Mince Pie. Christmas dinner at Yuletide Manor had always been a ceremony of excess. 12 courses, 3 wines, flaming plum pudding carried in on a silver salver by Grimshaw himself. This year the table was laid with the same magnificence. Crystal, candlelight, the Harrington-crested silver that had survived Cromwell. But the atmosphere was that of a wake with better lighting. The great dining-room chandelier blazed. The eternal candle had been left to burn alone in the long gallery under the watchful eye of a footman. Sir Gervase's body lay in the cold pantry, sewn into a sheet, awaiting the coroner who might not arrive for days. No one had appetite, yet no one dared refuse to appear. To stay away would be to proclaim guilt. So they came, dressed in sombre blacks and midnight blues, and took their places like condemned prisoners at a last feast. Poirot sat at the foot of the table. The host's chair at the head had been removed. He had insisted on serving himself from every dish, tasting each course first. The little grey cells required fuel, he said pleasantly, and besides it reassured the company. The meal dragged. Conversation was a corpse they all pretended was merely sleeping. Then came the mince pies. They arrived on a vast spode platter, each small pastry topped with a pastry star and dusted with icing sugar like fresh snow. A separate smaller plate held a single pie set slightly apart. Grimshaw, face carved from granite, placed the small plate in front of Poirot. "Cook's compliments, sir," he murmured. "She remembered you admired the ones with extra brandy last year when you dined here with Sir Gervase." Poirot's eyes lit. "Ah, the famous Harrington mince pies. One permits oneself a small indulgence, even in sorrow." He lifted the pie on his fork, breathed in the rich scent of fruit, spice, and brandy, and took a generous bite. The effect was instantaneous. His eyes widened. The fork clattered to the plate. He clutched at his throat with both hands, rising half out of his chair. "Mon Dieu, c'est amande amère," he staggered, knocking over a wineglass. Crimson spread across the white damask like fresh blood. Diana screamed. Dr. Meredith leapt to his feet. "Poirot! Cyanide!" The little Belgian swayed, face turning purple, then, with a supreme effort, forced 2 fingers down his throat. He vomited violently onto the silver platter, a stinking mess of half-digested mincemeat and brandy. Meredith caught him as he sagged. "Atropine? No, bitter almonds, definite cyanide. Get milk, quickly!" Chaos erupted. Footmen ran. Miss Lavinia fainted clean away into Verity's lap. Julian stood frozen, mouth open like a fool. Poirot, supported by Meredith, waved a trembling hand. "No, no, I am not dying. The dose was small, meant to warn, perhaps, not to kill. But another minute—" He straightened with difficulty, eyes blazing through the tears the poison had forced. "Messieurs et mesdames," he rasped, "someone in this room has just attempted to murder Hercule Poirot. The mince pie intended for me was laced with potassium cyanide. Enough to kill a man who finished it. Fortunately, Poirot has a delicate stomach and a suspicious nature." He turned to Grimshaw, who had returned white-faced with a glass of milk. "You said cook remembered my fondness for these pies from last year. But I have never dined here before in my life. Someone instructed cook to prepare a special pie for me. Someone who knew I would taste it first to reassure the table." He looked slowly around the circle of shocked faces. "Who knew I would play the taster tonight? Who left the dining room after the fish course and could have entered the kitchen unseen? Who benefits most if Poirot is removed before he names the killer of Sir Gervase Harrington?" Silence, thick and terrified. Poirot took the milk from Grimshaw and sipped, grimacing. "Dr. Meredith, you will examine the remaining mince pies. I think you will find only one contains the poison. The symbolism is crude but effective. The Christmas star on top, the poison within, a little joke perhaps from our murderer." Meredith, using a clean knife, cut open the pie from Poirot's plate. The rich brown filling was flecked with something white, crystals that dissolved even as they watched. "Cyanide," he confirmed grimly, "enough to kill 3 men." Julian found his voice. "This is insane. First Uncle Gervase, now Poirot. Who's next?" "Precisely my question," Poirot said. He was recovering quickly. Colour returned to his cheeks. "We are dealing with someone who has decided the eternal candle must not be allowed to complete its 12 nights. Someone who believes that if all obstacles are removed, Sir Gervase myself, the legend dies with us." He turned suddenly to Charles Redfern. "Monsieur le Notaire, you told us Sir Gervase made a new will. to be read on 12th night. Tell me, in the event of Sir Gervais's death before the candle has chosen, who inherits?" Redfern swallowed hard. The will is sealed, but the previous one, made 5 years ago, leaves everything to his sister, Miss Lavinia Harrington, in trust for—" He stopped, aware that Miss Lavinia had revived and was staring at him in horror. "To me?" she whispered. "But I never wanted—" "Silence!" Poirot snapped. "We are not yet at the end." He reached into his pocket and produced the silver cigarette case he had found in the snow that morning. "Mr. Julian Harrington, this is yours, I believe." Julian stared at it as though it were a snake. Yes. Lost it yesterday, I thought." "You lost it beside a trail of blood, leading to the ice house where your uncle was murdered. There is a dent on the corner, and a smear that I suspect is human blood. Would you care to explain?" Julian went the colour of tallow. I went out for a smoke after the lights came back on. Saw the French windows open. Thought Uncle had gone that way. I followed the prints a little distance. Then I panicked and came back. I must have dropped it. After finding your uncle's body abandoned in the snow. Yet you said nothing." "I was afraid. It looked bad." "Indeed it did," Poirot said dryly. Diana suddenly stood, chair scraping. "Stop it! All of you! This is monstrous! Uncle Gervais dead, Mr. Poirot nearly poisoned, and we sit here accusing each other like characters in a cheap thriller." She was shaking with rage or fear. Poirot could not tell which. Poirot regarded her thoughtfully. "Mademoiselle Diana, you were the first to notice Sir Gervais had vanished last night. You screamed. Yet when the lights returned, you were kneeling by the candle, facing away from where he had stood. Did you see nothing? Hear nothing? I told you." I turned to speak to Stephen. Her voice caught. Dr. Meredith's head snapped up. "Leave her alone, Poirot," he said harshly. "She's been through enough." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Ah, the faithful watchdog. Tell me, Docteur, when did you first realize that the blue flame of the eternal candle is produced not by sorcery, but by the combustion of copper salts dissolved in the wax?" Meredith froze. "Copper gives a blue flame," Poirot continued calmly. "A fact known to chemists, pyrotechnists, and medical men who studied chemistry at Bart's. You recognized it last night, did you not? That is why you feared blue fire. Because you knew the legend was a trick, a clever, centuries-old trick." The room was utterly still. Meredith's hands clenched on the table edge. "Yes," he said at last, "I recognized it. But that does not mean you killed Sir Gervais," Poirot finished. "But it means you knew the candle would never truly choose an heir. It was always meant to be a spectacle, nothing more. And yet someone has killed to prevent that truth emerging." He pushed back his chair. "Enough for tonight. Dr. Meredith, you will lock the remaining mince pies in the safe and keep the only key. Tomorrow we examine alibis, motives, and the exact chemical composition of the eternal candle. For now, I suggest we retire, and I further suggest that no one eats or drinks anything not prepared in the presence of at least 2 other persons." He bowed stiffly. "Joyeux Noël, mes amis. May we all live to see Boxing Day." As the company dispersed in frightened silence, Poirot lingered to speak quietly to Grimshaw. "The small pie intended for me. Who carried the message to cook?" "Miss Diana, sir. She came to the kitchen just after the fish was served. Said you had especially asked for one of Cook's brandy pies." Poirot's eyes gleamed. Did she indeed? He looked toward the doorway where Diana had disappeared, her arm linked through Verity Blaine's. The game he reflected as he mounted the great staircase, had just become considerably more interesting. In the long gallery, the eternal candle burned on, blue and steady and merciless, waiting for the next secret to rise with its smoke. Chapter 8. Revelations by the Hearth. Boxing Day arrived muffled in iron-grey cloud, the snow so deep that the lower windows were half buried. No plough would reach Yuletide Manor for days. The telephone remained dead. 12 people and 1 corpse were locked inside with a candle that refused to die and a murderer who had tried twice. At 10 o'clock, Poirot summoned them all to the long gallery. The eternal candle still stood on its ebony table, the blue flame exactly the same height as on Christmas Eve. The air around it felt colder than the rest of the room, as though it drew warmth to itself the way a vampire draws blood. Poirot had arranged 12 chairs in a semicircle facing the candle. He himself stood beside it, small, immaculate, deadly. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began without preamble, "the time for polite evasions is finished. Sir Gervase Harrington was murdered. Hercule Poirot was nearly murdered. We are imprisoned here until the snow releases us, and the killer is among us. Therefore, we shall have truth, the whole truth now." He placed on the table 3 objects: Julian's dented cigarette case, cleaned of blood; a small glass phial containing colourless crystals, cyanide; a single holly berry, still glistening red. "These," he said, "are the props in our little drama. Let us see who recognises them." No one moved. Poirot began to walk slowly before the chairs, hands clasped behind his back. First, the murder of Sir Gervase. The blow to the temple was struck from behind, slightly downward. The weapon was the heavy bronze candlestick that normally stands on the library mantel. It has been wiped clean, but microscopic blood and 1 silver hair remain in the ornamentation. The candlestick is now back in its place. Someone returned it after the crime. He paused before Julian. "You, monsieur, followed the blood trail and found your uncle dying, yet you said nothing. Why?" Julian licked dry lips. "I panicked. I thought I'd be accused." "You were correct. You would have been. And the cigarette case, conveniently lost exactly where it would damn you. Too convenient." Julian flushed crimson. Poirot moved on to Miss Lavinia. "You, mademoiselle, inherit everything under the old will. You have debts. You have prayed nightly for your brother's death. You believe the house is haunted, yet you are terrified of the candle. Why?" Miss Lavinia began to weep, silently, tears sliding down powdered cheeks. "Because Gervase told me what he intended to do with the new will. He said the candle would show who was worthy. He hinted it would not be me." "Yet you did not kill him." "I swear I did not." Poirot inclined his head and passed to Diana. "You, mademoiselle, told cook to prepare a special mince pie for me, one that contained enough cyanide to kill an elephant. Why?" Diana rose, white with fury. "I did nothing of the kind. I was in the still room arranging greenery when—" She stopped. Verity Blaine laid a warning hand on her arm. Poirot's eyes glittered. "When what, mademoiselle?" Diana sat down abruptly. "Next, Dr. Meredith, you recognized the chemical nature of the flame from the first. You knew the legend was false. You quarrelled violently with Sir Gervase 2 weeks ago in this very room. The footman overheard you say, 'If you light that thing, I will stop you, whatever the cost.' Meredith's face was stone. I was trying to prevent a cruel hoax. Gervase was obsessed. He believed the candle would expose us all." "And you feared what it would expose about you?" Meredith said nothing. Finally, Poirot stopped before Charles Redfern. "You, Monsieur le Notaire, drafted both wills. You knew that if Sir Gervas died before 12th night, without the candle completing its burn, the old will stood. You also knew that Sir Gervas had added a codicil only last week, one you witnessed. Tell us what it says." Redfern looked as though he might be sick. It revokes everything in favour of Miss Diana Harrington, on condition that she marries within 1 year of his death." A collective gasp. Diana herself looked stunned. "He never told me." "No," Poirot said softly, "but someone discovered it. Someone who realised that if Sir Gervas died now, Diana would inherit nothing until she married. And someone who knew that Diana is already secretly married." He turned to Dr. Stephen Meredith. "To you, Docteur." The silence was absolute. Meredith stood slowly. "Yes," he said, voice raw. "Diana and I were married in London 3 months ago. Gervais found out last week. He was furious, called her a fortune hunter, threatened to cut her off without a penny. We begged him to keep it quiet until after Christmas. He refused. He said the candle would reveal the truth on 12th night and shame us both." Diana was crying now soundlessly. Poirot continued, relentless. "So you decided to silence him before the candle could speak. You knew the chemical trick, copper salts in the wax. You knew the legend was fraud. On Christmas Eve, when the lights failed, a failure you arranged by tampering with the generator, you struck Sir Gervais from behind with the candlestick. You dragged him, stunned but living, through the library windows and across the snow to the ice house, where you left him to die. Then you returned, rejoined the search, and planted Julian's cigarette case to implicate him." Meredith's shoulders sagged. "Yes," he said again, almost inaudibly. "God help me, yes. But that was only the beginning," Poirot said. "When Poirot began to investigate, you tried to poison him with the mince pie, using Diana's name to deliver the message to Cook so that suspicion would fall on her if the attempt failed. You counted on the superstition surrounding the candle to confuse everything." He picked up the holly berry. "And these, the messages left for me, were your clever touch. You hoped to make the murder seem supernatural, the work of the curse, but you forgot one thing." He turned to the candle. The blue flame danced serene. "You forgot that Hercule Poirot does not believe in curses, only in human beings who are quite wicked enough without supernatural assistance." Meredith laughed then, a broken sound. "You have no proof. The snow has covered the tracks. The candlestick is clean. You cannot—" Poirot raised a hand. Grimshaw and 2 footmen entered. "But I can," Poirot said gently. "In your medical bag, Docteur, you will find a phial of potassium cyanide, missing exactly the amount used in the mince pie. On the cuff of your dress shirt from Christmas Eve, there is a microscopic spot of Sir Gervais's blood. Type O, quite rare. And finally," he produced a small wax-sealed tube. "Finally, I took the precaution last night of scraping a sample of wax from the very top of the eternal candle. Chemical analysis, performed by Dr. Meredith himself at my request this morning, shows that the blue colour is indeed copper carbonate, mixed centuries ago into the wax. But there is another substance, added much more recently. A slow-acting cardiac poison, introduced through a hollow needle into the core of the candle. Enough, over 12 nights, to kill whoever stood closest to it each evening, Sir Gervas himself." The room reeled. "You were not content to murder him once," Poirot said. "You planned to let the candle kill him slowly while everyone watched, so that the legend would seem fulfilled and suspicion scattered among ghosts." Meredith stared at the flame as though seeing it for the first time. Poirot's voice softened, almost sorrowful. You loved her, perhaps. But love does not justify murder, mon ami. Twice over, Dr. Meredith looked at Diana. She would not meet his eyes. Then, quite suddenly, he sat down, buried his face in his hands, and began to weep, harsh, tearing sobs that filled the long gallery like smoke. The blue flame burned on, indifferent. Poirot turned to the others. It is finished. When the police arrive, Dr. Meredith will be taken into custody. The candle may burn out naturally or not. That is no longer important. He looked at Diana. Mademoiselle, I am sorry for your loss and for your marriage. She lifted her head at last. It was never a marriage, she said bitterly, only a mistake. Poirot bowed. Outside, the snow had begun to fall again, soft and relentless, covering the blood, the footprints, the ice house, and all the old sins of Yuletide Manor beneath a blanket of perfect white. In the hearth, a log settled with a sigh. The portraits of dead Harringtons looked down in silence, satisfied at last, and high on its ebony table, the eternal candle continued to burn, blue and cold and merciless, waiting for the 12th night that would never come. Chapter 9. The stormy confrontation. The confession in the long gallery should have ended it. In any civilized house, it would have. The murderer had wept, the weapon had been named, the poison identified. The rest should have been silence, shame, and waiting for the snowplows. But Yuletide Manor was not a civilized house, and the Harringtons were not a civilized family. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, the sky had lowered to a bruised violet, and the wind came roaring out of the north like a living beast. The temperature plummeted, the old windows rattled in their frames, snow hissed against the panes as though trying to force an entry. The electricity flickered, died, revived, died again. Candles and oil lamps were brought out, turning the corridors into tunnels of trembling gold. Dr. Stephen Meredith had been locked in the blue bedroom on the 2nd floor, the key turned by Grimshaw himself. 2 stout footmen stood outside the door. He had not asked for food, water, or counsel. He had only asked once, in a voice so low the footman barely heard it, "Tell Diana I'm sorry." Downstairs, the others drifted like ghosts. No one could settle. The drawing-room fire roared, yet no one felt warm. The eternal candle still burned in the long gallery, watched now by Charles Redfern and Julian in alternating shifts. Its blue flame had become obscene, an accusation no one could escape. At 4:30, the storm reached its climax. Thunder growled over the hills, thunder in December, unheard of, and lightning lit the snow a ghastly white. In one of those flashes, Poirot, standing at the library window, saw the great cedar on the west lawn split clean in two with a sound like a cannon shot. It was the signal. The library door burst open. Diana Harrington stood on the threshold, hair wild, eyes blazing. She wore a man's shooting coat over her dress and carried a 12-bore shotgun broken across her forearm. Behind her came Verity Blaine, pale but determined, and Miss Lavinia, clutching her rosary and looking half mad. "Enough," Diana said. Her voice shook, but the barrels did not. "We are ending this tonight." Poirot turned very slowly. "Mademoiselle, put the gun down. You have suffered much, but I said enough." She snapped the shotgun shut with a metallic clash that made Miss Lavinia whimper. "Stephen is not the only one who has confessed. I helped him. I held the library door while he dragged Gervase outside. I wiped the candlestick. I carried the message to cook about your mince pie. I did it all, so shoot me if you must, but the candle dies tonight." Verity stepped forward. "We all know what it is now, a cruel trick with poison inside. If it burns to 12th night, Stephen's confession means nothing. The coroner will say Sir Gervase died of the curse. Stephen will hang for a legend. We are going to snuff it out and damn the consequences." Miss Lavinia's voice rose to a shriek. "It must burn. Gervase wanted it to choose. If we extinguish it, the ghosts—" "There are no ghosts," Diana shouted. "Only us. Only what we've done to each other." She started toward the door. Poirot placed himself between her and the corridor. "No, mademoiselle, you will not pass. Then move, or I swear I will shoot." The wind screamed. Another flash of lightning lit her face, stark and terrible. Julian appeared behind the women, face flushed with drink and terror. "Let her do it, Poirot! Let it end!" Charles Redfern followed, spectacles fogged, clutching the new will like a shield. From the staircase came the sound of running feet. The two footmen pounded down, shouting, "The prisoner! He's gone!" Window was open, rope of sheets tracks in the snow toward the woods. For one stunned second, no one moved. Then Diana laughed, a high, breaking sound. "He's running! Of course he's running! Stephen always runs!" She swung the shotgun toward the long gallery. Poirot stepped aside. There was, after all, very little a small Belgian detective could do against a 12-bore in the hands of a desperate woman. They surged down the corridor like a tide. Diana leading, shotgun levelled, Verity and Miss Lavinia behind, Julian stumbling, Redfern bringing up the rear clutching papers that no longer mattered. The long gallery doors stood ajar. The blue flame waited, serene and venomous. Diana kicked the doors wide. The candle stood alone on its ebony table. The room was empty. No, wait. A darker shadow detached itself from behind the arras at the far end. Dr. Stephen Meredith stepped into the candlelight. He was soaked with snow, lips blue, a Webley service revolver hanging loosely in his right hand. "Diana," he said hoarsely, "I couldn't leave you to carry it alone." For a heartbeat, husband and wife stared at each other across the murderous blue flame. Then Meredith raised the revolver, not at Diana, not at Poirot who had followed them in, but at the candle itself. "Stand back," he said quietly. "This ends now." Diana gave a wordless cry and lunged, not to stop him, but to stand beside him. Together they faced the flame that had ruined them. Meredith's finger tightened on the trigger. Poirot's voice cut across the room like a whiplash. "Arrêtez! You will not fire!" He stepped forward into the candlelight, small and utterly fearless. "You think destroying the candle destroys the evidence? Imbeciles! The poison is already analysed, the blood is typed, the footprints measured. You will only add sacrilege to murder." Meredith's hand wavered. Diana turned on Poirot, eyes streaming. "Then what do you want from us? Absolution?" "No," Poirot said gently. "Only the truth, all of it. One last piece is missing. The holly, the notes left for me. The candle lies. Ask the doctor why he fears blue fire." Stephen did not write those. His confession was complete. So who did? Silence, broken only by the howl of the storm. From the shadows near the fireplace, a new voice spoke, thin, precise, and utterly calm. "I did." Charles Redfern stepped forward, the will still in his hand. "I wrote the notes, I left the holly, I loosened the generator wire on Christmas Eve, so the lights would fail at the crucial moment. I even suggested to Stephen that the candle itself could be made to kill Sir Gervase slowly. No need for violence, I said. A perfect crime disguised as legend." He smiled, a small, tidy smile. "Unfortunately, Stephen is an impatient man, and Diana is impulsive. They preferred the candlestick." Redfern laid the will on the table beside the candle. "I have spent 15 years watching Harringtons tear each other apart for this estate." Sir Gervas's new codicil disinherited everyone except Diana, provided she remained unmarried. When I discovered the secret wedding, I saw my chance. Encourage murder, let the candle take the blame, then produce a third will, forged naturally, leaving everything to a charity I control. Simple. He shrugged, almost apologetic. You were never meant to be here, Monsieur Poirot. That invitation was my last mistake. The shotgun in Diana's hands swung toward Redfern. Meredith's revolver followed. Poirot raised both hands. No more blood under this roof. The storm isolates us, yes, but it also preserves evidence perfectly. Monsieur Redfern, you will come with me now. The rest of you will remain here until the police arrive. The candle can burn or not. It no longer matters. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then, slowly, Diana lowered the shotgun. Meredith let the revolver fall to the carpet. Redfern gave a tiny, almost courteous bow. After you, Monsieur Poirot. As they walked the length of the long gallery, the blue flame flickered, once sharply, as though aware it had been judged and found wanting. Behind them, Diana sank to her knees and began to sob, great tearing sounds that echoed from the rafters like the crying of all the Harrington ghosts at once. The storm reached its peak, shaking the very foundations of Yuletide Manor. And in that instant the eternal candle, which had burned without consuming its wax for 347 years, guttered, flared a brilliant, venomous green, and went out. Chapter 10. The Christmas Resolution. The candle died at precisely 6 minutes past 5 on the evening of Boxing Day. It did not sink nor fade. It simply ceased, as though someone had pinched an invisible wick. One moment the blue flame floated above the ancient wax. The next, there was only a thin ribbon of smoke curling upward, smelling of copper and bitter almonds. And then nothing. In the sudden darkness of the long gallery, every soul present felt the same thing. A release, as sharp and clean as a snapped chain. Grimshaw was the first to move. With the calm of a man who has served one family for 40 years and seen everything, he lit the oil lamps that waited on the side tables. Golden light spread again, revealing faces that looked suddenly older. Diana was still on her knees, hands pressed to her mouth. Meredith stood over her, revolver forgotten on the floor, tears cutting channels through the melted snow on his cheeks. Julian had slumped into a tapestry chair and was staring at the dead candle with the dazed expression of a man waking from a nightmare. Miss Lavinia had fainted outright. Verity was chafing her wrists. Charles Redfern alone remained composed. He even managed a small, regretful smile as Poirot fastened his own silk handkerchief around the solicitor's wrists in lieu of handcuffs. "You have won, Monsieur Poirot," Redfern said quietly. "I congratulate you. No, monsieur, truth has won, that is all." Poirot turned to the others. "Listen carefully. In 3 days, perhaps 4, the snowplows will reach us. The police will come. They will find Dr. Meredith's fingerprints on the bronze candlestick, traces of Sir Gervas's blood on the doctor's evening shirt, cyanide in the mince pie and in the doctor's medical bag. The forged third will hidden in Monsieur Redfern's dispatch case. And most damning of all, a letter in Redfern's handwriting, discovered by me an hour ago in the secret drawer of the library desk, instructing Dr. Meredith exactly how to tamper with the candle so that the poison would be released gradually over 12 nights. There is, therefore, evidence enough for 2 trials. One for murder, one for conspiracy to murder and defraud." He paused, letting the words settle. "But there is also mercy." Diana lifted her head. "Mercy? Oui, mademoiselle. Sir Gervas was a cruel man in his last months. He delighted in setting you all against one another, He taunted Dr. Meredith with disinheritance. He mocked Miss Lavinia's faith. He threatened to leave Julian penniless. He invited me here, not for companionship, but as a refined form of torture. To watch the finest detective in Europe record the disintegration of his family. Poirot's voice softened. Yet he is dead, and death pays all debts. I am not the law. I am only Poirot. When the police come, I will present the facts. But I will also present certain extenuations. A crime passionnel committed in panic, a young wife trying to protect a husband, a solicitor corrupted by 15 years of watching greed devour decency. The jury may be kinder than any of us deserve. Meredith spoke for the first time since the flame went out. And the candle? What do we tell them about that? Poirot looked at the great lifeless column of wax. We tell them the truth. That it was a clever 17th century trick, sustained by later hands for their own purposes. That it burned for 2 nights, and then, like all illusions, it ended. He smiled faintly. Some legends are best allowed to die with dignity. A silence followed, broken only by the wind, which had begun to ease at last. Julian stood, swaying slightly. Then what happens to the estate? Poirot turned to Redfern. Monsieur? Redfern gave a small, defeated shrug. Without a valid will after the 1931, and with Miss Lavinia as the last, surviving sibling, the estate passes to her. She may, of course, choose to make whatever private arrangements she wishes with the remaining family. Miss Lavinia stirred, opened her eyes, and astonished everyone by laughing. A thin, cracked sound that was almost sane. I shall sell the hideous place, she announced, every stick, every portrait, every cursed stone. And with the money, I shall endow a home for destitute gentlewomen where no one need ever speak of candles again. For the first time in days, someone smiled. It was Verity. The storm had spent itself. Outside, the snow had stopped falling, the clouds parted, and a thin, cold moonlight silvered the drifts. Somewhere far off, a church bell rang across the valley. The first sound from the outer world in 4 days. Poirot walked alone to the window and looked out at the transformed landscape. The wreckage of the cedar lay across the lawn like a fallen giant. Icicles glittered on the eaves, and high above, the stars were coming out, sharp and bright and indifferent. He felt a presence beside him. Diana, wrapped in a man's dressing gown several sizes too large. Will Stephen hang? She asked quietly. I do not think so. Transportation, perhaps, or a long term of imprisonment. There were mitigating circumstances. She was silent a moment. I loved him once, she said, not enough to save him, not enough to save myself. Poirot laid a gentle hand on her arm. Love is not always the gentle thing the poets claim, mademoiselle. Sometimes it is the storm itself. They stood together until the moonlight grew stronger. Later that night, the house settled into an exhausted peace. Fires were banked, lamps turned low. The eternal candle was carried, unresisting now, to the cellar, and laid in a crate lined with salt, as though it were a vampire that might one day rise again. Poirot sat alone in the library, a small glass of tisane at his elbow, making neat entries in his little green notebook. At midnight, Grimshaw tapped at the door. "Begging your pardon, sir, there's something you should see." He led Poirot to the entrance hall. The great Christmas tree still stood in the courtyard, its coloured lights long since dead. But overnight, the snow had drifted against the glass doors in such a way that when the moon shone through, it formed a perfect silhouette upon the marble floor. The outline of a tall candle with a single flame. Grimshaw shivered. "It'll be gone by morning, sir. Just snow. But I thought you ought to know." Poirot studied the delicate shadow for a long time. Merci, Grimshaw. It is fitting, I think, a last illusion, harmless this time. He reached out and touched the cold glass. Joyeux Noël, he murmured to the empty hall, and to all a good night. 3 days later, the snowplows came. The police followed. Statements were taken, arrests made, evidence sealed. The Harringtons scattered, some to London, some abroad, one or two to quieter places, where no one would ever ask about Christmas 1935. Yuletide Manor was sold the following spring to a manufacturer of wireless sets who turned the Long Gallery into a ballroom and the Ice House into a cocktail bar. Children played where a baronet had died. The Eternal Candle vanished into a museum vault, catalogued simply as Curious Wax Object, 16th Century. And Hercule Poirot returned to London, to his flat in Whitehaven Mansions, his perfectly arranged life, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that for once, justice had been tempered with something very like mercy. On his desk lay a single sprig of holly, posted from Shropshire without a note. The berries had dried to dark crimson. Poirot placed it carefully between the pages of his notebook, next to the final entry. Case closed. The candle is out. Yet some flames, once lit in the human heart, burn long after the wax is spent. Outside his window, London moved on toward a new year, unaware that somewhere in an English country house a legend had died. A murderer had been unmasked, and Christmas, for one small circle of tormented souls, had been saved after all.